Archaeologists crave unexplored territory. Nothing thrills more than new discoveries of ancient civilisations.
For over a century now, Peru has given us treasure after treasure. It's a vast country of extremes, from tropical rainforest to the dry deserts of the Atacama. In one of the most remote northern regions lies the most mysterious kingdom in Peru.
I'm Jago Cooper, and as an archaeologist who specialises in South America, I've always been fascinated by the secrets and mysteries buried deep in these awe-inspiring and forbidding landscapes. The history of this continent has been dominated by the stories of the Inca and the Spanish conquistadors. But in this series, I'll be exploring an older, forgotten past, travelling from the coast to the clouds in search of ancient civilisations as significant and impressive as anywhere else on Earth. In remote northern Peru, one such civilization thrived for over 500 years.
They were called the Chachapoyas, which translates as the people of the clouds. And who they were is one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of the Americas.
In the year 900 AD, on Andean mountaintops, lived the Chachapoya people. And the remnants of Chachapoya culture are amongst the most stunning and least understood in South America. The Chachapoya, quite frankly, are still a mystery to us. All we have to go on are tantalizing fragments, treasures and artifacts from faraway tropical rainforests, tombs placed high on unscalable cliffs, mummies hidden in caves, and one of the most impressive archaeological sites in South America. How did such a complex and advanced culture bloom in this remote part of Peru over 1,000 years ago? Before venturing into the mountains, my investigation into these enigmatic people begins here in the Peruvian capital, Lima. None of the indigenous South American cultures left us written records, so the earliest written accounts are the chronicles of the Spanish conquistadors.
In 1638, a century after the Spanish arrived, Father Pedro Calancha, one of the first chroniclers, ventured into Chachapoya territory, and he wrote of the Chachapoya people that they were bellicose and indomitable, herbalists and sorcerers. And to the amazement of the Europeans, he also wrote that they only obeyed a chief during wartime, and not any special one, but he who is known to be most valiant, enterprising and daring.
Sorcerers on mountain peaks, bellicose Indians who were not controlled by their chiefs. Intriguing though these conquistador claims are, they're not much to go on. The Spanish invaders weren't always reliable eyewitnesses.
The problem is, only a handful of archaeologists have even ventured into the Chachapoya territory.
So before heading into the Andes, I need a more trustworthy source. One of the few who has studied the cryptic Chachapoya is Adriana von Hagen, so I met with her to establish the basics. What is it that drew you to the Chachapoyas region? What do you find so interesting about the Chachapoyas culture?
Just the fact that you know, they're so little known, and that the iconography, the imagery, that's what I've been studying, what it can reveal about a culture. You will notice that all Chachapoya sites, almost all, are located on mountaintops or ridges. And they were known as sorcerers, using Amazonian esoteric knowledge of herbs and hallucinogenic drugs.
So little of the Chachapoyas region seems to have been mapped. How much of the archaeology do you think we've actually found?
5%, if that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can count on one hand the sites that have been excavated. scientifically.
Incredible. And it's a huge region.
Yeah, it's huge.
Why do you think more work hasn't been done by archaeologists there?
Mainly because it's isolated. At least it's isolated to us in our Western sort of concept of getting to places, distant places. I mean, for the free Colombian people, walking for 2 weeks is nothing. But for us, even driving for a day is a long way.
Peru is roughly 5 times the size of the UK. The Chachapoya were found to the north and on the eastern side of the Andean mountains. In 9,500 square miles of challenging terrain. After a flight from Lima and a 14-hour drive, I finally arrive in what is, to this day, called the Chachapoya region. And seeing the epic landscape for the first time, it strikes me that this isn't an obvious place to build a civilization. The first humans made their way across Alaska and into North America over 14,000 years ago. Over the next 1,000 years, they travelled southwards, along the Pacific coastline and through the continental interior to colonise and populate South America. The Chachapoya culture emerged around 900 AD, and some archaeologists believe they emigrated to these desolate mountain tops from the lower-lying Amazonian region. But we know that when they arrived here, they built homes on the hilltops, and eventually grew to a population of 500,000 strong. They ruled these mountains and valleys for 6 centuries. But the first question surrounding the Chachapoya is why settle in this particular region?
To the west is the Andes, for thousands of miles, the highest mountain range in South America. To the east, the vast Amazon basin, stretching out thick, dense tropical rainforest. To modern eyes, the Chachapoya region appears to be surrounded by barriers. Appears to be.
Archaeologists have to look beyond first appearances.
This is the Rio Utucubamba, one of many rivers that flows through the Chachapoya region. Although some of these rivers start just 150 miles from the Pacific coast, they defiantly all turn eastwards, flow into the Amazon basin, and run 3,000 miles out into the Atlantic.
To modern eyes, the river may seem like another obstacle to make ancient life difficult. But of course, it's easier to move over water rather than through the jungle or up into the mountains. If, as seems likely, the first Chachapoya had rafts and canoes, the river takes on a whole new significance. It becomes an A-road connecting the Andes with the Amazonian basin. Journeys that would take days on foot could be completed in just hours on the river.
At lower levels, there's a hint of the tropical jungle and the connections with the vast Amazonian basin, the most biologically diverse place on Earth.
So despite living high in the mountains, the Chachapoya could trade with the peoples of the Amazon, ensuring a supply of an amazing array of herbs, medicines, animals and exotic bird feathers. The Chachapoya had chosen an ideal crossroads. What appears isolated would actually have been a hub for trade. Their lofty communities on the mountain tops would have been closely connected with the people downriver.
This is beeswax, a typical product of the Upper Amazon, and is exactly the type of exotic commodity that they would have traded up into the mountains and beyond.
So, it seems one thing we can know for certain about the Chachapoya is that by using the rivers, they could trade with the peoples downstream in the Amazonian basin. The vast majority of the materials traded from the tropical regions were perishable, but some of that evidence still survives. In Chachapoya sites, spectacular headdresses have been found, festooned with exotic feathers of parrots from the Amazonian rainforest. Animals from the lowlands have also been found, mummified and preserved. With such a rich supply of resources close by, it appears the Chachapoya thrived, transporting the tropical goods deep into the Andes.
These transactions undoubtedly enriched the Chachapoya knowledge of herbs, medicines, hunting and mythology. But this wasn't their only frontier.